Welcome to another Tech Help video brought to you by AccessLearningZone.com. I am your instructor, Richard Rost. In today's video, we're going to take a look at AutoNumbers. Are they good or bad? Should you use AutoNumbers as the primary key in your tables? Today's question comes from Craig. Craig asks, I'm taking a college course and the instructor gave us a homework assignment. He wants us to create a table to store vehicles where the primary key is the VIN, the vehicle identification number. I thought you said to always use AutoNumbers. Who's right here? Well, Craig, I recommend you do what your instructor wants. I don't want to be responsible for anyone failing their class. However, in my professional opinion, and I've been doing this for 26 years now, I believe it's almost always best to use an AutoNumber as the primary key field for just about every table. Yes, I would definitely use an AutoNumber for this particular table. It's better for relationships and for lookups. You can and should definitely store the VIN in a table as a secondary key. You can index it no duplicates to search on it and to make sure that you don't enter the same car twice. But I would not use this as the primary key. It's a very long value. It's text, which is not optimized for lookups, and it will take up a lot of space in your database, especially in the foreign key fields in child records. If you link this car to something else, like a trip table, that you log which car took the trip, and you've got 5,000 trips logged, well, you got to copy that VIN now 5,000 times. We'll talk about that in a minute. So with my professional opinion, and with my experience, I can definitely say that you're almost going to want to use an AutoNumber in a table like this. Let's take a look why. First, before we understand AutoNumbers, let's understand what key fields are. A key field is a field in a record that holds unique data which designates the record from all other records in the table. Things like invoice number, account number, customer ID, serial number, product code. You can use phone number or email address as a key field. I used to build databases back in the 90s, and people used to always use phone number. What's your phone number? To look them up, and they would use it as a key field, and that's okay. You can do that. But in my opinion, it's not the best. Now, a primary key is a specific kind of key field. Most tables should have a primary key, which is the one field that is used for relationships and to identify the record. A record may contain multiple key fields, but only one can be the primary key field. So you might have phone number and email, and those values might be unique. You may say in your database, I only want one phone number or one email per customer record, but you should have a customer ID as the primary key. That's the field you're going to use to make the relationships between your tables in your database. Now, a foreign key field is used to relate to the other table. When relating two tables together, the foreign key is the child table that points back to the primary key in the parent table. So here in my silly little picture, you can see on the left are customers and on the right are vehicles. All right, the customers have ID fields that are primary keys, 101, 102, and 103. You store those values as the foreign key in the vehicle table. So each of the vehicles has a primary key, which is again is an AutoNumber 1 to 6. But that foreign key is the number that you store from the customers. And as you can see, if you were to use VIN as your instructor wants for each of those vehicles, okay, you'd have lots and lots and lots and lots of very big values stored in that table. And of course, big equals slow. So keep that in mind. Now there's two kinds of key fields. There's natural keys and synthetic keys. Natural keys are found in the real world. You get it from somewhere else usually, right? An invoice number, an account number that someone else gives you, okay? A serial number. You could be typing in products and the manufacturer puts a serial number on it. That's found in the real world. A product code. A phone number, an email address, a social security number, a VIN number, a flight number. Those are all natural keys. You can use them in key fields if you want to, but it's something that has meaning to the user. Whereas a synthetic key is system generated. An employee ID, a customer ID, product ID. All right. There's lots of names for these if you do reading on different sites or if you have different books. They're also called surrogate keys. That's the most popular, is a surrogate key. Blind key, factless key, etc. There's about 15 different synonyms that I found. And again, you can use both in the same table if you want to. For example, if you've got a table called employee T, which has one employee per row, you could use social security number as a key field. That would be a natural key. But I would recommend adding your own auto number called employee ID, which would be a synthetic or a surrogate key. Why? We'll find out why. Now, what exactly is an auto number? An auto number stands for automatic number. Access assigns these numbers and maintains them. All right, it's a synthetic key. Now, it's the perfect choice for a primary key, and we'll learn why in a few minutes. They normally start at 1 and count up. They can be random. There are some different options available. They are normally, but not always, sequential. So they're usually in sequence, but they might not be. So again, the point is that it shouldn't matter to you. Access maintains it. Access is the only one that cares about it. Why use auto numbers? Well, it makes creating key fields simple. Access creates them and maintains them for you. You really have almost nothing to do to keep a primary key in your table. It's easy to create relationships between tables because Access maintains those keys. You never have to worry about auto numbers changing. Like a natural key might change. Someone's phone number might change. Their email address might change. A VIN number shouldn't change, unless you take it to the right body shop. Just kidding. But natural keys may change in the real world, and then your customer says, well, I got to change my phone number in your system. Well, that phone number is now, if it's a key field, you've got it linked to all these different tables. So now you've got to have coding in your database to automatically update all that stuff. And yes, the expert access users are saying, well, Cascade Updates takes care of that for you. Well, no, not if you have linked tables. That's a whole nother ballgame. All right, auto numbers are best for keeping stability in your data and your backups. If Joe Smith changes his phone number and that's your primary key, and now you have to restore from a 3-day-old backup, he didn't change it then, so now again you've got problems. Auto numbers will take care of that. They never change. This customer will always have the same auto number. All right, here's some math stuff for you. A long int, which is what an auto number is, the long integer. It's smaller than text keys. A long int is 4 bytes, so it goes from minus to plus about 2.1 billion. All right, a text key of the same size would take 10 bytes, so that's more than twice the size. Smaller equals less overhead equals faster. You always want your databases to be as small as possible. They will run quicker, they'll process quicker. If you're paying for time on a server where you pay for either throughput or storage space, that's important. You get quicker processing times, faster lookups, faster transmission times over the network. Takes up less disk space. All right, and again, keep in mind the space saved in your foreign keys too. All right, if you're using VIN number as your primary key for a vehicle, well, I've mentioned this before. It's a big number. I forget how many digits. I just Googled it. 17 characters long for vehicles made after 1981. So that's huge for a primary key. And again, if you're storing trip information and the car is used for the trip and you've got 10,000 trips, that's a lot of data that you're wasting. An auto number would save you some space there, which saves processing time. Another reason to use auto numbers, they upscale nicely, pretty much automatically, to SQL Server and other database server platforms. So if you move beyond Access for your backend tables, right, they create identity or sequence type fields in SQL Server 2012 and later. A common key strategy across all of your tables can reduce programming time, costs, and make your systems more compatible. If all of your tables are based on auto numbers, everyone on your team knows that they need to handle auto number lookups, relationships, etc. a certain way. You don't want your different tables having different types of primary key fields, and then if you've got multiple people working on your database, designing it and developing it, then they're like, okay, what is the primary key for the vehicle table? Or what is it for the customer table? What is it for the order table? This way, your team knows every table's got its own ID field, and it's an auto number. And this might not seem like a lot, but it is if you confuse your programmers. And this, of course, only is a factor for larger databases that have multiple people working on designing them, but it's a factor. It's something to take into consideration. Auto numbers protect you against changes in business decisions. I don't know how many times I've had clients say, well, the management wants to do this now, and you got to change the database. Let's say your employee number is numeric. You merge with another company that has a text-based employee number. They've got like an initial in there or something. Now you've got to merge both databases and deal with every related table in your database a different way. All right, by having auto numbers, even if company A has a set of employees and company B has a set of employees, as long as they've all got auto numbers, you can very easily change and merge things. Yeah, you might have some overlapping conflicts. If Joe from company A was customer 15 and now Sue from company B is customer 15 or employee 15, someone's going to have to change their number. But chances are you might have less overlaps, and your scheme will stay the same. That's what's important. All your forms and reports that are designed for a number will now still work. Natural keys do not always stand the test of time and can sometimes become meaningless or have weird meanings. Look at stock tickers. Google used to be GOOG in the stock market, but now the company was officially renamed on paper to Alphabet Inc. So their stock ticker doesn't mean what the company is. Natural keys can easily be confused with each other if they look alike. Another reason not to make them human readable. Again, Goog is good for the stock ticker, and that's fine, but don't use it as your auto number. Don't use it as your primary key. So when not to use auto numbers, okay, don't use an auto number if you need a value with a real world meaning. If it has to make sense to someone, if it has to be human readable, then don't use an auto number. But chances are you're not going to be using that value to make your relationships. If you need sequential numbering, don't use an auto number. If you have to make sure that your invoices go from 1 to 10, don't use an auto number for that. You can still have that kind of a number in addition to your auto number, but you don't want to rely on an auto number to always be sequential. They can leave gaps if they're deleted. If you delete record 5, now you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, and so on. Don't use an auto number for any value the customer will see. We'll talk about the German tank problem in a few minutes. Auto numbers should be meaningless to the end user. Let me reiterate that. Auto numbers are meaningless to the user. That customer ID, that invoice ID, the product ID, they should not care about what those are. Neither should you. Those are for internal purposes only. If you want a special customer ID to give to the customer so they can see it on their invoices, give them a separate ID. Give them a customer code. I've got videos that talk about how to make custom customer codes and sequential invoice numbers. I'll give you links to those below. Auto numbers should not be exposed to customers in situations where you have possible security concerns. All right, customer information, for example. We'll talk about this in a second. The folks over at the Access Web, thou shalt not use the auto number if the field is meant to have meaning for thy users. It's the 7th commandment. Access cares about auto numbers and uses them for lookups and relationships. That's it. You and your end users should not have to see them. If you need a number the user or the customer will see, then create your own secondary field, either synthetic or natural. That's up to you. Now, sequential numbers, like an auto number can potentially be, can give away intelligence, like how many customers you have, how many orders you've taken, etc. It's just like in a restaurant. If you've got one guest check and Joe comes in on Monday and gets check number 100 and then comes back on Friday and gets check number 104, he knows you've only had 3 customers in the middle there. So that might not be something that you want him to know. If you have a new client and they get customer ID 12, they'll know that you don't have that many clients. So you might not want to have that information visible. This brings up the German tank problem. In World War II, the Allies would capture or destroy German tanks. They could deduce the total number of tanks that the Germans were producing based on the serial numbers they found on the components, like the gearboxes. So if their intelligence and their spies were saying, well, the Germans got 20,000 tanks over here and 15,000 over there, but yet the serial numbers that you're capturing only indicate a few hundred, well, there you go. They played all kinds of games during World War II. They would set up fields with wooden boxes to look like tanks so that when the planes flew over, they would see these fields of tanks lined up, and they were just decoys. But the statisticians looking at the serial numbers said, nope, this is what they're doing. So auto numbers should never be shown to the customer if you're concerned about this kind of business intelligence leaking out. I know I teach my beginner classes, and I tell the students to put the auto numbers on things like invoices and such, but that's just for the beginner students so that I don't get them all confused with having to hide numbers and stuff. I want them to grasp the concept of why we need an auto number, and then in my later classes I talk about this. So I've got a couple side videos I'm going to reference. These are free videos, of course. One is how to create your own custom sequential automatically incrementing number with the dmax function. If you need order numbers, in this particular example, the customer's accountant said, I need all of your invoices to not have any gaps. They got to start at 1 and count up. You don't want the customer to see that, but you might need that internal numbering to know, for your accounting purposes. And of course, you can obfuscate or hide the value if you want to. You could do tricks like multiply it by 3 and print that as the actual invoice number so the customer doesn't know. In fact, in my members only video, I show how to do it so that each customer gets their own sequential invoice numbers. So XYZ Corp will see their invoices as 101, 102, 103, 104, just for them. They'll know how many invoices that you've made for just them. In my second side video, again, free video, it's on YouTube, on my website. It's how to create your own secondary key field not based on your auto number. For example, in this class, I do a C followed by a date timestamp, so like year, month, day, followed by a random number. So the chances of getting two of the same customer number that are exactly the same are infinitesimal. You could base it on customer information, like the first initial, the last 3 letters of their last name, or whatever you want to do. It's totally up to you. This would be the value that you'd show the customer. You don't want to show the customer your customer ID. And again, this video talks about how to do it. I'll put links to these videos in the description below. Now, there are some instances when you don't have to use auto numbers. You can, but there's no need for it. For example, tables you're never going to relate somewhere else. If you got a simple little table just for lookup values and you're never going to make relationships with other tables, sure, fine. You can make the table without putting any auto numbers in it. Temporary tables. I make temp tables all the time. Like, I just want a list of email addresses to send this particular email batch to, and I'll create a temp table with a make table query. I'll just dump the emails in it, the first names, and then just send it. No need to have to put an auto number in that table because the data is not going to stick around very long. The third option is if you're incredibly pressed for storage space and a natural key is available, like Social Security number. Although I don't find this a particularly valid reason, some people do make the argument. If you've got an extremely tight amount of space that you're working with and you've already got a natural key in that table and you're not going to be relating it to a lot of other tables, okay, fine. You can get away with not having to have an auto number, but most of the times you're going to want to add one anyways. Now, there are a bunch of arguments against auto numbers, and I'm going to address all of them. I actually spent most of about 2 days researching this online and in different books, and I've tried to find all the different arguments that people make against using auto numbers, and I wanted to address them all. Honestly, I've been teaching Access for over 20 years. I've been using it as a developer myself since 1994, and I've always just assumed that auto numbers were the proper solution because that's what Microsoft teaches in their books and all their software. That's what the various authors that I've read said. I've read I don't know how many books on databases, and the prevailing wisdom has always been use an auto number. Well, now 26 years later, since I started first building Access databases, and I'm somewhat of an expert, I wanted to do the research myself and to see what all these arguments are. What do people say are the reasons why you shouldn't use auto numbers? And the first one is natural keys allow you to see information about the data without multiple fields. Auto numbers are not human readable. For example, the invoice number 222NY1023, you can tell this customer is number 222 from New York. That's the invoice number, and it's based on the customer number, the state, and then I'm assuming some random number or maybe a sequential number. And the argument there is that you can see information, but my counter is that you shouldn't have to. Sure, store that invoice number as a secondary field, but don't use it for relationships. And again, space, size, all those things matter. That's a pretty big number. Okay, so I would not use it as a primary key field. What if you've got to store order details, the line items, in a second table? And again, you're making the relationship with that big number. The next argument, composite natural keys are better than auto numbers. A composite key is a key field made up of 2 or more other fields. For example, last name plus first name plus date of birth plus state. It's human readable. It gives the sales rep information. It can also give away information like the customer's date of birth. They might not want that known if you put it on an invoice. And it is rare, but quite possible for 2 customers who have the same name, the same date of birth, and the same state. It's possible. You want to think of the rare instances where things might happen. Okay, and this particular example, I would not use that. It gives away information. You don't want something like this to be human readable. Plus, that's going to be a pretty big field. And again, it's going to make your database bigger. Let's say you're using a composite natural key for your employee email addresses. Right? Your email address is first name plus last initial plus the year they were born plus, at xyz.com. Now it's possible to hire two people with similar names born in the same year, and if the customer figures this out, now he knows how old your sales rep is. Now he knows his sales rep was born in 92 or whatever. As you'll find, I'm not a big fan of natural keys. Next argument, phone numbers or email addresses are easy to use and look up the customer. I don't know how many times, I walk into a store, like your local pharmacy, and they're like, well, what's your phone number so I can look up your stuff? Sure, have those as secondary keys. Store that data, but you don't want to use those values in your database to do the relationships between the tables. Okay, you can even index that field, no duplicates if you prefer, so that you can't have this, two customers with the same phone number. However, again, these values might change in the future, and they're not the best choice for primary keys. They will take up a lot of extra space. And again, if the customer changes their phone number, now you've got to go updating multiple tables. Argument, adding an auto number when I already have another field is wasting space. Yes, but auto numbers are tiny. And with today's computing power, the low cost of storage, high-speed networks, the tiny amount of overhead for a 4-bit long integer is negligible. All right, the benefits far outweigh the costs. It's easy to add, and there's zero maintenance on an auto number. Let's say you're using the Social Security number as a primary key. That's a number in that well-known format. You need 9 characters or 9 bytes to store it. You want to store the SSN as a text value because it's got a leading 0, and foreign workers may have letters in their SSNs. I didn't know that until recently, actually. So you add an auto number as the primary key. Now you add 4 bytes to each employee record, increasing the total size to 13 bytes per employee. All right, so 9 bytes to store the SSN, and then 4 more bytes to store the auto number. Now, let's take related tables into consideration. We've got 10 employees who clock in and out once a day. So over a year, that's 7,300 records. If you're using just the SSN as the foreign key in the time clock table, that's 65,000 bytes of data versus only 29,000 bytes with the auto number. And this is just one field in one table. In other words, you will save space in the long run by storing more information in the employee table. We're adding an auto number in addition to the Social Security number. So each employee takes up more space. But if each employee is linked to a time clock table, right, with 7,000 records in it, and now you're not storing the Social Security number in the time clock table, you're storing the auto number. And so you will save space in the long run. It's those foreign keys that take up the space, and that's why they're better for relationships. It's 9 bytes to store every Social Security number, 4 bytes to store every auto number. That's a 5-byte overhead per table in your time clock table. So the math works out. I touched on this one briefly. The next argument. If I use referential integrity with cascade updates, I don't have to worry if my natural key changes. Access updates the child tables automatically. So if the customer does change his phone number and my tables are linked with referential integrity with cascade updates set to on, Access will handle changing all the child keys. That is true. However, you cannot enforce referential integrity on linked tables. So if your database grows to multi-user or you upscale to SQL Server, you're in trouble. You have to do that update yourself. As soon as you split your database and your tables are in multiple files, you lose that ability to use referential integrity with either cascade updates or cascade deletes. All right, so if you have any kind of a multi-user setup, forget it. So this argument is invalid. Next argument, auto numbers are not good for database replication and multiple users. The argument is if you want to take a database and have a remote user who's not connected to the internet go and add or edit records and then come back, now you've got auto numbers that you have to try and merge together. That's true, that's not good with incremental auto numbers. However, in this case, you can use a random auto number, or if you need even more protection, you can use a UUID or a GUID. I'll talk more about what these are in just a second. However, in today's world, most people have a constant internet connection, and these types of connections are rare, where you have to split your database and give it to someone to use offline. There are some exceptions. In fact, I've got a video on how to do this. I just made it. I'll give you a link in a minute. If you've got someone who wants to be able to take their database on the plane or on a remote site, maybe in some other country where they don't have great internet service, you can make a replicated database and then merge the records back together again using random auto numbers. But more importantly, you would have the same problem even with natural keys. Okay, it's difficult either way to bring back two edited databases and manage the conflicts. The auto number isn't the problem here. All right, it's bringing back that information and syncing it up. And you can use, again, random auto numbers or GUIDs to alleviate this problem. Side video 3 talks about this, and again, this is a free video, how to use random auto numbers to create multiple copies of your database for users to take offline. You can then resync the data. This is great for airplane travel. In fact, this specific database came about because one of my customers was like, I travel a lot, I'm in the air a lot. The internet in the air is okay for web browsing or email, but it's not good enough for a constant connection to a database. It's very packety. It's very high in latency. And he goes to a lot of developing countries where he might be out in the middle of the wilderness with no internet service. So he needs to be able to look up his information in his customer table, and he has to be able to add records to like the contact table, add orders, that kind of stuff. So I showed him very easily how to create a secondary database that with just a couple of table links and some queries, you can sync this information back and forth using random auto numbers. The auto numbers in the system, like customers and stuff that are already in there, won't change. Okay? But if you add new stuff, it'll get assigned random auto numbers. Chances are, unless you've got a really, really big database with lots of volume, those numbers won't collide. You won't have any conflicts when you remerge those two tables back together again. Why? Let's take a quick look. All right, if you use random auto numbers, you get a 4-bit long integer. We've already talked about this. That's 4 billion possible combinations of numbers. If you added one record every second for a whole year, you would still only have a 1 in 136 chance of running into a duplicate value. So assigning new values, random auto numbers, pretty much guarantees you're not going to have any conflicts. So you can have two people using the same database, adding orders, adding contacts, right? They get the same primary key, which is their customer. That's the same for both of them. But they can add new stuff as a foreign key, right? And not have to worry about conflicts. And if that's not good enough for you, you can also use something called a UUID, a universally unique identifier, or a globally unique identifier. That's Microsoft's term, as a GUID. All right, it's a big number. It looks like that. It's 128 bits. But, again, the chances of having conflicts are infinitesimal. According to the GUIDgenerator.com, if every human on Earth generated 600 million GUIDs, there would only be a 50% probability of a duplicate. I didn't do that math. They did, but that's why Microsoft uses those. So the argument, if you need to merge two tables together, auto numbers are impossible to work with. Yeah, it's tough. It's not impossible. It's just difficult. Right? You need to change the auto numbers in table 2 so they don't conflict with table 1 if you don't want to use random auto numbers. And, of course, the same problem as with the replication in the previous example. You can use update queries to adjust those foreign keys, but the bottom line is you have the same problem with natural keys, too. This isn't just an auto number problem. Everyone argues, well, you can't use auto numbers because if you got to bring together multiple sets of data, yeah, that's a problem, but it's not an auto number problem. It's a problem with keys in general. All right, here's a big one. This one is the argument that a lot of people complain about. It says if you accidentally delete a record or your table becomes corrupted, you can't get auto numbers back and have to renumber all the child records. So if somehow someone accidentally deletes customer 5, well, 5 is gone. Well, that's simply not true. Now, I teach people in my beginner classes that once you delete an auto number, it's gone forever, because I don't want to confuse them. There is a way you can get those back. All right, while it's generally taught that you cannot reuse auto numbers, it is possible to use an append query to reinsert deleted records. This is side video number 4, free video, how to restore a deleted record with an append query. It is possible to get auto numbers back. You don't have to renumber all the child records. All right, so someone accidentally deletes customer 5, okay? Or your database gets corrupted and you realize you're missing some records. Of course, the first and most important thing is to always make sure you have a good backup of your data. That being said, if your records get deleted or corrupted, you can look in your backups and see, okay, who was customer 5? So now I've got his information. Well, I show you with an auto number, you can get that auto number back by using an append query to copy it from another table. All right, so restore your backup into a separate table, delete everything you don't need, and then you can append those records back into your primary table, and they'll be assigned their original auto numbers. So all your links are good, all the child records are still safe, and you don't have to go renumbering stuff with append queries and update queries. This was the biggest argument that I found. Well, if I delete some records, then, well, first of all, don't delete records. Never delete anything, especially customers. Just mark them inactive. Orders, mark them canceled. Okay, but if stuff gets accidentally deleted, yeah, you can restore it. There's a way. So this argument, invalid. All right, here's an argument that's actually true. AutoNumbers can add another index to the database, which can slow down edits, inserts, and deletes. This is true. I cannot argue against it. So if your table is primarily used for data entry, and you do very little searching and sorting on it, you may not want to add an AutoNumber if another natural key is available. In other words, an AutoNumber adds another index, which is a separate little hidden table that Access uses to speed up searches and sorts. Okay, so when I say go give me customer 136, that index is already sorted numerically so I can quickly find 136 and look up who it is. So if you're doing lots of searches and sorts, you want this index table. The downside is that every time you edit or create a new record, it has to update the index table. So if your database is primarily used for data entry, let's say you've got a room full of people doing, customer service, and they're constantly adding records, and they're never searching and pulling up old records, then yeah, you might want to have it so that the table that they're adding data to isn't indexed, because they can just very quickly add their records to it, and it doesn't slow down the database by updating all these index tables. So that is one argument that's actually valid, but it's a very rare case where you actually have to have this. Okay, here's another example. A table on a web server that tracks hits by user. The user is identified by some field, let's say ID or email or whatever. And all you do is store that ID plus a timestamp. You download this information monthly, and you generate a report from it. You don't want to slow down the web server with every addition for your report that's only run once a month. Okay, every hit on the website, it tracks the user. Okay? But this isn't an AutoNumber problem. Again, it's just a problem with having a primary key field. You'd have this problem with a natural key too, so this is not an argument against AutoNumbers. Any primary key would be unnecessary in this case, since you're not planning on relating the records to another table. A lot of the times when people are railing against AutoNumbers, they're actually railing against primary keys. It has nothing to do with what kind of primary key field you have. Another argument, you can't always assume that the most recent record has the highest AutoNumber. That is true. Because records can be deleted, and those numbers technically can be reused, you should not make this assumption. Always record a date-time value if this is needed. All right, so again, it's not an AutoNumber problem, it's a primary key problem. Don't assume when you're adding records that the highest AutoNumber is necessarily the highest or most recent value, especially if you're using random AutoNumbers. AutoNumbers may leave gaps in the sequence, and they're not good for things like invoice numbers. That's true. However, again, the AutoNumber should not be used like this. All right? They're not supposed to be used for values that the customer is going to see or that your accountant cares about. Generate your own invoice number if you have to have sequential numbers. Yeah, they'll leave gaps. That's how AutoNumbers are. That's not a reason to not use them. Okay? Use a different field and create your own invoice numbers. Another argument, AutoNumbers have to start at 1. What if I want to use a larger number to start with? Once again, I will reiterate, that shouldn't matter. Remember this? AutoNumbers are meaningless to the end user. Right? They're not for you. They're not for the user to see. You shouldn't care what values they start at as long as they're unique. I get asked that all the time. How do I start my AutoNumbers at 1001? So my customer doesn't know that they're customer number 15. Again, give them a different number to see. Don't show them your AutoNumbers. But if you really want to artificially inflate your AutoNumbers, you can use an append query to do that. Right? Or just you just append into the table a value of 1001 and you'll get that. Or add 1,000 blank records and delete them. There's tricks you can play, but again, you shouldn't have to. No one should care about your AutoNumbers except Access. This is a valid problem with AutoNumbers. If you delete records at the end of the table and then do a compact and repair, the AutoNumber index is reset and links to child records may be off. That is true. Be careful of this. All right. For example, if you have invoices in your system, you get orders in your system, okay, and you delete the last 5. Now you compact and repair, okay. Those numbers will be reassigned again. So if you delete the last 5 records, let's say it's 95 to 100, okay. Compact and repair, you go back in. The next AutoNumber being assigned is going to be 95. Now, if you've got another, let's say, order detail item in there that has an order number of 95, it gets attached to this new invoice. So that could be a problem. Okay. Again, don't delete orders, mark them inactive, delete those child records first. That's just laziness if you don't. Okay, but that is a problem. You know, if you compact your database, those last auto numbers get reassigned again. So be aware of that. That's just something that a good access developer has to know. But again, you may have this problem too, even if you use natural keys or some other form of primary key. If you delete some records, right, and somehow those numbers get reassigned, it could link to the wrong child records. And again, people say, well, Access isn't perfect. I've seen it make mistakes with AutoNumbers before. Yeah, that's true. AutoNumbers aren't perfect, right? No database system is perfect. Mistakes will happen even with natural keys. Once again, that's not a problem with AutoNumbers. That's a problem with databases in general. And of course, back up your data. If you have problems with your AutoNumbers, you can go back to your backups and look and see. And yeah, I've got videos on backing up data too. Okay, so in conclusion, AutoNumbers are easier to use than natural keys or text. Access maintains them automatically, and they provide a more stable database than natural keys. Generally, AutoNumbers save disk space and increase database performance. They decrease total cost of ownership. Other options are available to provide the user with visible identifiers for records, such as order numbers, so as not to give up business intelligence. However, an auto number should be the primary key for most tables that you build, with few exceptions. Here's my list of references, some of the research that I did. I'll put links to all of this stuff below the video window. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. I had a lot of fun researching this information because I wanted to make sure that I was right. I wanted to make sure that auto numbers were definitely the best way to go. And I hope I've made a convincing argument that you should use auto numbers in your tables too. Now, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Please rate this video, give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Post your comments below, subscribe, and ring the bell. Click that little all button, and you'll get email notifications every time I release a new video. You can head over to my website too. I've got a pretty active Access forum there if you're interested in reading conversations on Microsoft Access. And if you want to see your questions answered in videos like this, visit my Tech Help page. If you haven't already, feel free to take my free Access Level 1 course. It's on YouTube or on my website. It's a full 3-hour-long tutorial that covers all the basics of how to build databases in Access, including using auto numbers. And if you like Level 1, Level 2 is just $1. Thanks, I hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time.